Hey everybody, ready to get a little deep? Today we're diving into something that I think everyone's felt at some point, but not something we always like to chat about. The fear of death.
Oh yeah, it's a big one.
It really is, but don't worry, this isn't going to be all doom and gloom. We're checking out this YouTube video and it's called The Really Reason Why Humans Fear Death. It's not what you think. It's from this channel called Quantum Wisdom.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, and the video goes into some pretty thought-provoking stuff about, like, the root of why we're so afraid to die. And it's not always the obvious stuff, you know?
Makes sense. Death is the total mystery, right?
Yeah.
And I think that unknown is a huge part of what makes it scary.
Right. Like, no one knows for sure what happens afterwards, so it's natural to feel a little freaked out by that.
Totally.
Like, have you ever, heard a weird noise in your house late at night?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Your mind instantly goes to the worst case scenario, right?
Of course.
Because you just don't know what's going on. And the video actually makes this point that even if you believe in a happy afterlife or something, that fear doesn't just vanish.
Yeah, I get that.
It's like there's always this tiny voice in the back of your head whispering, but what if I'm wrong? That uncertainty can really mess with you.
It makes total sense, though, when you think about it.
Okay, so we've got that fear of the unknown, but then the video adds this other layer, loss. And it's not just about losing the people you care about, it's about every experience you've ever had, every relationship, even your sense of self, poof.
Gone. That's heavy. It's like the ultimate loss of control.
Exactly. Especially for that part of us that we call the ego, right?
Yeah.
You know, the part that's all about me, myself, and I.
That's so true. The ego wants to survive at all costs, so death feels like the end of everything.
And for people who believe that this life is our only shot at happiness, that fear gets even more intense. Because if this is it, well, the stakes are pretty high, aren't they?
Yeah, for sure.
But here's another thing that's so fascinating. The video talks about how the way we view death is also shaped by our culture and religion. Like, think about how different societies see death. Some see it as this awful tragedy, while others view it more as a transition or even a celebration.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's like they're looking at the same event through completely different lenses.
Yeah, totally. The video talks about Buddhism as an example. They see death as just this natural part of an ongoing cycle of existence, which is a pretty stark contrast to some cultures where death is something scary that you want to avoid at all costs.
Right.
And then you throw in all the different beliefs about the afterlife that come with different religions. Those beliefs can bring comfort to some people, but for others, they can actually create fear, like fear of judgment or punishment after they die.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it really shows how much of our fear of death isn't necessarily inherent, but actually comes from the world around us. Okay, so we've talked about the fear of the unknown and the fear of loss, but then the video throws in this curveball. It asks, what if this ego thing, this me that we're all so attached to, isn't actually the real?
Now that's an interesting thought.
Right. This is where the video starts getting into more spiritual territory. It suggests that the ego is just a part of our mind, a tool for interact, but that our true self might be something much deeper and maybe even eternal.
Like maybe the ego is the car, but the real self is the driver.
Exactly. So what are your thoughts on that? Do you think there's something to that idea?
It's definitely something to think about. And if it is true, then hanging on so tight to this ego self makes death seem like the end of everything, which just feeds the fear even more.
Right. And this actually leads us to another really fascinating idea, the illusion of separation. Have you ever had that feeling like when you're out in nature where you feel totally connected to everything around you?
Yeah, absolutely. Those moments where you feel a sense of oneness with everything.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the video uses this great analogy. It compares us to a wave returning to the ocean. So death, from this perspective, is like that wave merging back into the vastness of the ocean. It's not an ending, but a return to something big.
Wow. That's a really powerful image. It makes you wonder if maybe our fear of death comes from forgetting that connection, forgetting that we're part of something much larger than ourselves.
Yeah, it's like we get so caught up in our own little world, like in our routines and worries that we kind of lose sight of that bigger picture. But here's what I found really thought-provoking. The video says that the unknowns we face inside ourselves during life are just as important as whatever might happen after we die.
That's a good point. I mean, yeah, it's easy to get fixated on what comes after death. But the reality is we're always facing unknowns within ourselves right now, in this moment.
Exactly. The video talks about how death kind of forces us to confront these big questions about who we are, what our purpose is, questions that honestly a lot of us try to avoid.
Right.
And it can be uncomfortable for sure, but maybe that discomfort is what pushes us to grow. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. It's like they say, the only way out is through, right? Facing those uncomfortable truths about ourselves, that's how we grow. That's how we discover what truly matters to us.
I love that. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the fear around death, but the video doesn't just leave us hanging there, right? It actually gives us some practical ways to overcome that fear. Did you find those helpful?
Yeah, I'm curious to hear what they are. What did the video suggest?
Well, the first one is all about accepting that we're mortal. Like, the video really emphasizes that death is just a natural part of life, just like the seasons changing, you know? Yeah. It's about embracing this concept called memento mori, which means remember that you must die. Now, before you think that's morbid, stick with me here, because the video's point is that remembering our mortality can actually help us appreciate the present moment so much more.
Yeah, if we're constantly aware that our time is limited, it can help us prioritize, figure out what truly matters, and, actually enjoy each day we have.
Exactly. It's like life is a gift. That's why it's called the present, right?
Yeah.
And that actually leads us to the next suggestion, living in the now, really being present. Because let's face it, fear usually comes from worrying about the future, right?
Absolutely. Worrying about what might happen. All that what-if thinking totally robs us of actually enjoying what is happening.
It does. And the video talks about mindfulness as this powerful tool to stay grounded in the present. So, like, really savoring a meal, having a deep conversation with someone, or just noticing how beautiful nature is, right? Mindfulness helps us appreciate those little everyday miracles we often take for granted.
I think it's about hitting that pause button on all the mental chatter and just being present, like really present with what is.
Yes, 100%. Okay, so the video then introduces this other really interesting idea, seeing death as transformation. And it builds on that wave analogy we talked about earlier. The idea being that energy never really disappears, it just changes form.
Right, like the law of conservation of energy in physics. Energy can't be created or destroyed, just transformed.
Yes. Exactly. And the video poses this question, what if consciousness is a form of energy? So then, could death be a transformation and not an ending? They use the example of a caterpillar transforming into a butterfly.
Oh, that's such a beautiful analogy. Instead of fearing death, maybe we could approach it with more curiosity.
Yeah.
More like a sense of wonder. Just like when we see a caterpillar turn into a butterfly.
It is a beautiful analogy, and here's where the video gets super inspiring. It actually says that facing our fear of death, though it can be hard, can bring us some incredible gifts. Had you ever thought about that?
Gifts. I'm intrigued. What kind of gifts are we talking about here?
Well, for starters, the video suggests that contemplating death, actually thinking about it, can deepen our appreciation for life. Because when we truly understand that our time here is limited, we start to focus on what truly matters.
Right.
We stop sweating the small stuff and we start really valuing those moments of connection, of joy, of feeling a sense of purpose.
It's like suddenly seeing the world in high def. And it's not just about appreciating life more, though. The video also says that facing death can bring us this huge sense of inner peace.
How so? I can see how it could be anxiety-provoking at first, but how does inner peace come into play?
Well, the video explains that it comes from letting go of the illusion of control. Like, once we accept that death is just a part of life, we can finally relax a little, We can embrace the journey with all its ups and downs and just accept that we can't control everything. Does that resonate with you at all? Absolutely. It's about surrendering to the mystery of it all, finding peace in the present moment instead of trying to control everything, which is impossible, right? It's like acknowledging that we're not really the authors of our own stories, but more like characters in this much larger narrative that's unfolding.
Perfect. And then finally, the video suggests that thinking about death can actually connect us to something bigger than ourselves, like that sense of awe and wonder we were talking about earlier. So whether it's feeling the vastness of the universe or the interconnectedness of nature, or maybe even a sense of the divine, recognizing that we're part of something larger can really fill us with gratitude and a sense of belonging.
It's like a shift in perspective, right?
Yeah.
It's going from feeling isolated and alone to realizing we're connected to this grand unfolding story. And that lets us tap into a sense of purpose and meaning that goes beyond our individual lives.
I love that. It really is remarkable how the video reframes the fear of death. It's not something to be avoided, but maybe a starting point for growth, for peace, for connection. It's given me so much.
Me too. It's definitely challenged some of my own ideas about death. It's opened up some new ways of thinking about it all.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder if there's more to the story of death than we usually think. And speaking of stories, the video ends on this super thought-provoking note. It asks, what if the fear of death isn't something we should try to avoid, but actually something to lean into? What are your thoughts on that?
It's a big question for sure. I mean, it kind of turns everything we think about fear on its head, right?
Yeah.
Instead of running from it, What happens if we turn around and face it head on?
That's exactly it. The video's point is that when we face our fear with courage and curiosity, we can unlock a whole new level of wisdom and peace that we might not get otherwise. Like the fear itself becomes our teacher.
That really resonates with me. I mean, think about it. In our own lives, we grow the most when we push ourselves outside of our comfort zone, when we face those things that scare us. So maybe confronting our own mortality instead of shying away from it could lead to some of the most profound growth we can experience.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what does it all mean for us as we're, going about our lives? What can we take away from all of this?
Well, I think the video is encouraging us to see death not as the end, but as this essential part of life, embracing the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Whether you take that literally or metaphorically, it's about finding meaning and purpose in this moment, knowing that our time is precious.
And it's about connecting with something larger than ourselves, right? Whether it's nature, spirituality, or just the beauty of being alive. It's about living fully, loving deeply, and letting go of that fear so we can really experience all that life has to offer.
The video ends with this beautiful call to action, to just take a deep breath, look at life and death with open eyes and hearts, and see what we discover. It's an invitation to explore, to question, to just embrace the mystery of it all.
And that feels like a perfect way to end. It's not about getting all, but about going on the journey. So to ever leave you, what if embracing the fear of death, all its complex, unlock, keep exploring,